Okay, we may have a few people that join late, but we're going to go ahead and get started. And that is perfectly fine. But I want to say good morning and welcome to our February webinar with the Kentucky Advising Academy. Kentucky Advising Academy is an initiative of the Council on Post-Secondary Education, and we are thrilled that you decided to join us today and hope that you get some information that you can put to immediate use. As many of you know, my name is Mitzi Holland, and I'm the director of the Kentucky Advising Academy. And I'm joined today by some of our KAA regional coordinators, as well as guest presenters, Dr. Catherine Walker-Payne and Amalia Gomez. Both will introduce themselves just a little bit later on. But for now, I'm going to pass the torch over to our regional coordinator, Cheryl Brumley.
All right, hello, everyone. So as people are joining in, we, as usual, want to get to know a little bit about who is joining us today. So if you could please take a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat. We'd love to know your name, what organization you are with, as well as your title. And if you could share the best piece of advice you've ever been given, and bonus points if it was advice about post-secondary advising on your own path. Just pop those in the chat. Oh, this too shall pass. That's a good one. All right, well, thank you everybody for popping those in there, and continue to share, because I know we still have people that are like slowly trickling in. Just name what organization you're with, and if you can share that best piece of advice. But we're going to keep going with our agenda today, and ELA credit will be available for you after the webinar, and we'll get details on how to receive that at the end today. So on the agenda, we have our brief introduction of the Kentucky Advising Academy, in case there's anyone new, some new faces that are joining us today. And then I'll turn it over to Dr. Walker-Payne and Amalia, who'll be sharing some information on their roles, as well as the practices and considerations when providing diversified support to students. At any time, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop that in the chat, and we'll share those questions before we wrap up and during our Q&A portion that we have later. And if we don't get them answered in the webinar, or you have anything that's pressing, then be sure to send an email, or we'll reach out with any answers to those. We'll wrap up today by going over some ways to stay connected to KAA. And remember that you have to stay until the end, and you'll get that QR code to register for your ELA credit. So a little bit about KAA is our purpose. As the Kentucky Advising Academy, we exist to provide support to school counselors and really all professional educators who find themselves in any kind of post-secondary advising role. So this could be teachers, coaches, club sponsors, Frisky coordinators, those in higher ed, community partners, and the list goes on. It's important for us to expand that idea of who counts as a post-secondary advisor, because we know that not one person in any situation can really do all of that vital work for our students. So we develop these professional learning opportunities and resources to help build that knowledge, capacity, and community around this post-secondary advising process. And if you followed KAA for any amount of time, you probably know that we do that in a few ways. Monthly, we offer a well-advised podcast, as well as a monthly webinar. Both of those usually share a related topic, and they give practitioners a chance to convene and gather ideas from each other. We also host full-day, regionally based, in-person professional learning events, and some are even happening later this month at KCTS campuses near you. You'll get more information on that event later. And we also build comprehensive advice. We're also building a comprehensive advising toolkit. And we'll share information and tips and spotlight advising practices throughout the state. And we'll have all kinds of information later for you on how to take advantage of some of those resources that we offer. To accomplish all of these services, we have our regional coordinators, myself, and my 3 colleagues who are also in our meeting with us today. And we'd certainly love you to have us to join us for all these opportunities. So be sure you take advantage of on how to stay connected at the end of today before we wrap up. So with all of that, I'd like to introduce our guest for today, Dr. Catherine Walker-Payne, Director of the Center for Accessibility and Learning Equity at Spalding University, and Amalia Gomez, Latinx Admissions Counselor at the University of Louisville. So I'll pass it off to you both and let you introduce yourselves a bit more, and then we'll dive right into today's topic.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm so happy to be with all of you today. So my name is Amalia Gomez. I'm the Hispanic Latinx Admissions Counselor at the University of Louisville. I work primarily with Hispanic families and students from the whole state of Kentucky, but I also have a couple high schools assigned within Jefferson County. So I'm a main admissions counselor for those high schools in JCPS. A little bit about myself. I've actually worked for UL now for 2 years under this role, but previous to that, I used to work for Jefferson Community and Technical College as an admissions counselor as well, where I had the opportunity to work with ESL students and the ESL program at JCTC. I am originally from Cuba, so I am immigrant myself. Been living in the US now for 6 years and have completed a bachelor's degree within the University of Louisville and completed a master's degree for UL as well. So this topic is actually very personal to me because I was that same ESL student going through the college process pretty much by myself, and especially with families that didn't necessarily speak the language. So I completely understand what ESL students have to go through in order to obtain their goals within that college process.
And I'm Catherine Walker-Payne. I'm the director of the Center for Accessibility and Learning Equity at Spalding. So the Center for Accessibility and Learning Equity provides several different types of supports to all of our students. So one of the things that people often think of first is we work with students who need academic or housing accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act to help students access our campus, which is absolutely central to the work we do. But the learning equity piece is really important of the work of our office as well. So we do a lot of targeted supports for students who are students with disabilities, but also students who are conditionally admitted. We do a lot of work with our students who don't quite meet the admissions requirements for the university to make sure that they have the supports they need, if they're coming in with a little bit of a less solid educational experience up until the point of college. We also we have a reading lab. We do a lot of reading support, success coaching. So aside from just accommodations, we take a very holistic approach to thinking about what learning equity looks like on our campus to make sure that all of our students coming in have access to the supports that they need in order to be successful.
Right, so on our first question, we have, how do your institution assist and support students from diverse student populations? Specifically speaking for the University of Louisville, we strive to foster an environment of inclusiveness. We commit ourselves to building an educational community that understands and respects the whole spectrum of diversity, whether that is race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, national origin, sexual orientation, disability, and religion. We obtain these by providing a series of resources at the university level, whether that is student-led organizations, programming through our cultural center, admissions events, and dedicated personnel to work with students from a variety of backgrounds. Specifically from our Hispanic Latinx initiatives, we offer a variety of programs to support not just the admissions process, but also the retention of Hispanic Latinx students at U of L. From the admissions office, specifically to my role, we have created accessibility by providing resources in Spanish for students and families. So most of our admissions materials are already translated into Spanish. We have also created programs and events throughout the year to invite students and families to come to campus, experience U of L, but from the lens of the Hispanic Latinx culture. We have also worked collaboratively with the community, and this is a very important piece when working with Hispanic Latinx and also ESL students is working with the community, being out in the community and advocating for them. We also have on that retention process, we have our own Hispanic Latinx Initiatives Office. They focus more into that success coordinators, kind of like coaches, to make sure that students, when they enter U of L, they're going to have a support system until they graduate. And there we're going to have Latino student organizations, as well as mentoring programs and leadership opportunities for students to be supported throughout those 4 years.
And so Spalding, if you're not familiar with it, we're a small private university in downtown Louisville, in the tradition of the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth, so a Catholic history, and we are very mission driven. So part of our mission is that we are a diverse community of learners. And so one of the things that we do just at the core, I think, of who we are as an institution is getting to know our students. We're small. Our average class size is about 15 students. And so faculty, staff, people all over campus get to know individual students and their stories in a way that works really well for a lot of our students. And so the whole mission, diverse community of learners, meeting the needs of the times, really is sort of, it threads through much of the work that happens on our campus. But we have some specific programs for a variety of students who are underrepresented in a variety of different ways. So our program for conditionally admitted students, again, so those are our students who are coming from high school who may not have met the posted admissions requirements for the university. We support those students with a lot of targeted one-on-one support with success coaching, reading lab support, that type of thing. I'm really pleased that our fall to spring persistence rate for our conditionally admitted students match that is the overall first year population. And so if you've worked with students in the past who you're not sure if they're going to make it into college in the first place, you know what a win that is for us this year. We started a new summer bridge program, thanks very much to CPE for providing some grant funding to do that. And that program specifically targets students with disabilities, students who are low income, students who are first generation, and or students of color. So that was a really good experience for us, again, to think about some really specific support that provided a social connection for students as well. Of course, formal accommodations, I'll get a little bit into more detail about formal accommodations later. That's a really important piece of the puzzle for a lot of our students. About 10% of our student body is registered for receiving some sort of accommodation. By and large, the most common accommodations that we provide are for students with ADHD. And students, I think, are attracted to Spalding. So if you don't know much about us, one of the things that we do is we have 6-week sessions. So a student still takes a full semester of coursework, but they're taking 1 or 2 classes at a time in 6-week blocks. And that's a fantastic setup for students who may hyperfocus in some way. They are able to get through 1 or 2 classes, focus only on 1 or 2 classes at a time, have a week to sort of take a breather, and then jump into their next class. So just the general structure of our classes, I think, is a really important way that assists and supports many diverse student populations. It aligns well with students who have to work full-time as well. Speaking of ADHD and the success coaching I mentioned, we spend a lot of time focused on doing success coaching for students with ADHD, attention hyperactivity deficit disorder. That's right. One of the things that a lot of students with ADHD have in terms of accommodations is extra time on testing or a distraction-reduced testing environment. And that's super important for a student who's taking a class that has timed tests, quizzes, and exams. But oftentimes in a college classroom, the work that a student with ADHD has to do requires some organizational skills that sometimes they haven't honed. And so success coaching is a nice complement to those formal accommodations. In that case, for a student to start developing some of those task initiation and completion skills. So we really do a lot of focus, again, with success coaching with students with ADHD. And then, you know, I think I really try to make sure that students are aware at our orientation or even at the point of admissions that they know that they can come and talk about their specific concerns as they're thinking about transitioning into post-secondary education. You know, students often know what worked or didn't work for them in high school. And I love to talk to students early in the admissions process to kind of think about whether or not Spalding is going to be the right fit for them. I also am at all of the new student orientations and summer programs to sort of talk about the ways that we support students. So we really try to make it just part of the culture around campus to provide that support. And then I think college and post-secondary readiness for students. Students come to college with such a variety of previous educational experiences. Some of them have been really positive, and some have been less than exemplary. We have students who come who didn't have a great high school experience, and they have mixed feelings about education in general, but they're here, and we're so glad that they are. You know, obviously, students who've had their school disrupted by COVID are still really feeling the ripple effects of that disruption. And so we're a little bit at a loss sometimes. So historically, you can use grades in high school as a pretty good predictor of how a student will do in college. Not so much anymore. All of that's really flown out the window. So some of the things that we really think about for college readiness are students' willingness to ask for and seek assistance. Again, we do a lot of stuff as part of our institutional culture to try to watch out for students and get them connected around campus early. We use an early alert system. But there's always this initiation piece for students that can be a little bit of a transition when they come to college that they may not have had to have done in high school. So that's one of those things that I think more than anything, more than test scores, more than writing ability, more than comfort with certain academic subjects, is that ability to ask for help and that willingness to either reach out for assistance or to accept assistance when it's offered.
Yeah, and kind of like following that same train, I want to say specific advocacy for our students and also for our families, specifically from the lens of ESL students, Hispanic, Latinx, and Hispanics in general. It's a lot of advocacy for them to know what the process for attending college looks like, and at the same time, working with the community. Specifically, among the things that we have done within U of L admissions office and extending that work to the community, it's providing college readiness events where we talk about what the college process looks like, whether that is when to submit admissions applications, when to complete financial aid, what a scholarship is. At the same time, being able to provide materials and just personnel who can attend these students in their tongue language, and trying to incorporate the families. It's hard enough for students who are either ESL, Hispanic, Latinx, where their families really want to be involved in the process, but most of the times language is a barrier. So you find students who are 17, 16 years old who are navigating the college process by themselves, and families do want to be involved most of the time because of language barriers. The students are just pretty much navigating the process by themselves. Creating safe spaces within organizations where students can come to us and just discuss their situations, talk about their family situations as well, so we can better recommend career pathways for them as well. So in a nutshell, I would say advocacy for our students, making sure that we're creating those safe spaces for them to come to us as high school counselors, but also creating those safe spaces within the college level. So creating positions like admissions counselors who will be understanding of how different the process can look like for an ESL student or for a Latino student. We have to understand that these are students who are either first generation students, they're maybe their second generation living in the US, or this is their first time actually being in the US. And the whole process looks super different for them and also for their families. So what might seem something that you would think that the student has the knowledge for, very simple things actually don't click for the students because they're navigating this process for the first time and their families actually did not attend college in the US. All right, so what considerations should be made by those in advisory roles to the students. Specifically for ESL Latinx students, up-to-date information about immigration policies at the national level, but also at the state level. We need to be conscious of what's happening in the country in terms of immigration policies and how is that reflecting within our state. An example of that is at this time, the amount of immigrants that we're having they are seeking asylum in the US. And we have representation of these communities, even here in the state of Kentucky, with an increase of representation of Cubans, Venezuelans, but also our refugee populations. We have to be conscious of our student body within the state, and then the policies that actually apply to them. Specifically from the state of Kentucky, a misconception that we get a lot, and specifically of our students and at the high schools, is to be considered those students as international students. So we have to understand what the different immigration statuses might be for different student populations. There we can have permanent residents of the US or DACA undocumented students. They are not considered international students because they have lived enough in the country not to be considered international students. Specifically from the state of Kentucky, we do have the law that as long as you're graduating from a Kentucky high school, you will be considered a resident of the state for the purposes of tuition. So that is something that we have to keep in mind when we're advising those students. And that's a very general misconception when we're working with students, that they will be considered international students for the purpose of attending college. Specifically for ESL students, we have to have a very transparent conversation of college readiness and English proficiency. If we have a student who might have immigrated to the United States, maybe in the last 2 years of high school, or maybe in their senior year, they're still taking ESL courses within our high school. What is the English proficiency that student might have in order to attend to a 4-year college? And what are the support systems that college might have for them once that they get there? So having a very transparent conversation with them in terms of that English proficiency, it might be better for the students to attend a college that does have the ESL program. We do have several universities in the state that do offer ESL programming, and then they must still need that extra year of ESL before they can take those college level courses. Because at the end of the day, we want for them to be successful and to be able to move forward with the career pathways later on. So being conscious of that English proficiency when we're working with students. Going back to that same up-to-date information on initiatives and existing programs within the different colleges and universities for ESL students and the Hispanic community in general as well. Whether that is scholarship opportunities, the same topic about in-state residency, and different student organizations that can be of support of those students.
I think, kind of echoing some of what Amalia has said, is that institutional fit really does matter. I think that sometimes, especially students in high school, they may see certain schools and are interested in that school for reasons like athletics, for example. Not to pick on U of L, but sometimes a small school is a much better fit for students, and kind of sometimes understanding what it is about a certain type of institution that's drawing a student, and sometimes pushing back a little bit if the fit may not be right. I went to a large public university and that was the right fit for me. I don't think I would have enjoyed being an undergraduate student at a small school like where I work now, but it's very valuable for other students. So it really does matter. That fit is so important. For students specifically who have IEP or 504 plans in high school, starting small and perhaps emailing the Disability Services, Accessibility Services office at the colleges that they're interested in is really important to kind of understand how accommodations might work in college. There are different legislation governs accommodations in K through 12 versus college. So sometimes it's a little bit of a shock for students coming from high school to college in terms of what accommodations actually look like. Additionally, there are different accommodation requirements in public versus private schools in terms of whether or not accommodations will meet the student's preference or what the institution is able to provide. So, sometimes a student who is deaf, for example, may prefer to have a sign language interpreter for everything, but the institution may say, but for online classes that are asynchronous, they will be appropriately captioned, but we won't have an interpreter to interpret asynchronous sessions. So that type of question is really important for students to start asking and understanding early in the process, so that they're finding a school who, who is providing accommodations. Accommodations you have to provide, but there's still a lot of different style and different approaches at different schools for exactly what those look like. So that's a really important thing. And then considering majors or academic programs. Some students need a little bit more time to settle into the routine of being a college student, and they may not want to take a major of study or a program of study where they have to jump into major classes right away. So for example, a student who wants to be a nurse is going to have at least 1 full year of taking general elective courses to build a nice strong foundation before they take science classes. Whereas criminal justice students here at Spalding and a lot of other schools will start taking those major classes right away. There are pros and cons to both approaches, but kind of starting to understand for a student what has and hasn't, kind of what may work for them is important. And then I see the question, the institutional fit and how to guide students. Gosh, I like to understand from students what's worked well for them in the past. I always take a really strengths-based approach in working with students who are looking at colleges, because obviously I always keep in mind a student that is thinking about going to college has had some things work for them up until this point. And what have those elements been, and how do you draw out what that looks like? Maybe they talk about feeling like they had a teacher that they could go to for everything. For me, sometimes that's a student who's going to do well in a smaller school. Sometimes a student likes the ability to just sort of like blend into a crowd. Maybe that student's like, yeah, a big school would be really, really good for me. I'll think about specific activities, but I think really asking students what's worked well for them up till this point. And then if you have rapport and the ability to hear from a student what hasn't worked well, they'll tell you if you give them space to tell you what hasn't worked, but really kind of listening through sometimes the parts of that, sometimes there's a little filtering in what hasn't worked. But I think leading with that question tends to work pretty well.
In my case, for most of the students, specific ESL, Hispanic Latinx, most of the times they don't even know what the right questions to ask. Getting a sense of just inviting them to a safe space where they can just talk about the things that they like and the things that they would like to continue to pursue after high school, and just getting a sense of who they are and what they want to achieve. And from there, maybe guiding a conversation, because most of the times those students might not even know what questions to ask in the first place, specifically ESL students who might not be in the country long enough to even understand what the college process looks like. So anything that you start that conversation on, you will get the response of a student, right? Based on that's the response that I give it to you. And then they will feel encouraged to then ask questions. And then that way you can get to know them a little bit better and therefore advise them on that sense.
I think I may be off on our order, but I'll jump in. So what do you recommend to those advising high school students charged with ensuring these students are ready for post-secondary success? So my experience in working with students who've had 504 and IEP plans in high school is that they've had very disparate experiences in having ownership over their accommodations in high school. Some students are really involved. They know what their accommodations are. They have practiced some of the advocacy component. But there are also students who, when they come into college, I ask them about how their IEP supported them, and they're really not sure. And so the more a student who has an IEP or 504 can have ownership and knowledge and understanding of the ways that their accommodation supported them in high school, the better they will do going to college. One of the things that's important for students who use accommodations to know is that in college, they do have to work on self-advocacy with regard to accommodations. It is not as seamless as a process in higher education as it should be in K-12. And so really helping students understand early that, you know, they're going to be the one who most likely is going to give their notice of accommodation to their professors. They're going to have to be the one, if they need additional help with reading, they're going to have to be the one who schedules their appointment with their reading lab. Of course, we're going to reach out to students, but students have more ownership, and that is a little bit shocking for students sometimes. I want students coming into college, I encourage you to help them become deeply aware and involved with understanding what their accommodations are, and what learning strategies work well for them too. I think of students as being experts on their own experience. And if you give them the opportunity to think about what's worked well in their learning, they often are able to articulate that when they get to college very nicely. The other thing to keep in mind is there have been so many gaps, gosh, over the past couple of years. I think this fall, I have seen more students who did not have formal IEP or 504 plans in high school. In some cases, their teachers worked with them and provided accommodations sort of off the books. In some cases, students who very obviously have some learning differences for a variety of reasons, often family culture, never have been assessed for learning disabilities or differences. And so it's important to keep in mind that you're going to work with students probably every year who would benefit from accommodations, but have never, for whatever reason, received those supports up until this point. And that's hard. It's really hard to see somebody come in to college and say, you know, I've always struggled with reading, but my family didn't want people to think that I was different, or, you know, some more negative self-talk too. My family didn't want me to think I was, you know, not bright or wasn't able to do the work. So we never explored that option. So I'm really so proud of our 18-year-olds who come in. You know, we have, for example, a counseling center on campus that can do all of those learning assessments for students for free, which is amazing. Not all colleges do that, you know, but for students who are 18, they're on their own, they can make those decisions, start exploring some of these learning differences for the first time and really seeing that light bulb click. So again, it's not only students who have IEP and 504 plans. Be on the lookout for students who don't have them and maybe should have. And then again, that early contact is really helpful. So one example that I've seen a couple of times recently with students who've had accommodations, who have had formal accommodations in high school, is that they are used to having, again, a really high degree of support, but reasonable. So the IDEA Act, which governs K through 12, provides that students should have support for student success. In college, the Americans with Disabilities Act requires access. So there's a big difference between success and access in a lot of different ways. And so oftentimes, again, students who are looking for that success component, they're able to find it. Those elements exist at universities. But again, it's more of that student initiative to connect with those resources versus it being built into their accommodation plan. And so again, that early conversation, I love to get students connected with the different areas around campus that, you know, that may parallel some of the supports that work for them in high school, but they just need to know that it is going to look a little different. The other piece of advice is that it can take a little while, especially if students don't have any sort of documentation of disability, to put accommodations in place. My goal for students is always to have accommodations in place the first day of class. We have lots of students who maybe had 504 or accommodation plans, or 504 or IEPs in high school, who think, I'm going to see what happens in college without those supports in place. And, you know, it's a natural transition time for students to try things a little bit differently. I would encourage a student to go ahead and get registered with the office. They get their notice of accommodation. If they don't want to use it right away, they don't have to. But that way, if they find that they do need those supports, they've already completed the process. We can already work together and try to get those accommodations implemented in the classroom really quickly versus the process sometimes that it can take for the back and forth to get any old documentation or that sort of thing. That's really important. I'd much rather students have accommodations in place and not need them than to not have them, not to have anything in place and realize, you know what, I really do need that extra time on a test. I really do need a distraction reduced testing environment, but I don't have it. And I have a giant anatomy and physiology exam tomorrow, and I'm not going to be able to do my best because I haven't pursued accommodations yet.
Kind of like echoing Dr. Walker-Payne was mentioning about encouraging that early outreach, flexibility services and ESL programs. We have to acknowledge the diversity that exists within the Hispanic culture as well as ESL students. We are talking of students from a wide range of countries, cultures, and also different immigration statuses. It's key to establish that safe place where the students can come to us and talk to us about their experiences and their own personal situation, so we can better advise them into career pathways. And for example, here example of that is when we're working with DACA undocumented students, and there are particular career pathways that they might be interested on. Unfortunately, there are laws in order to get licensing that do require to have at least a permanent resident status within the country in order to even obtain that license. For example, when we're discussing nursing programs, medicine school, we need to, when we're advising those students, we have to make sure that we're understanding different requirements that later on those career pathways will require for them, and then maybe finding other type of career pathways that might be a better fit. I know that sometimes it's a very hard conversation to have, but making sure that students, when they're thinking of different career pathways, we also have to advise them into what might be a better fit for them as well. At the same time, just like I said, creating those safe spaces, they might not feel comfortable sharing their statuses, even their own status, or maybe it might be their families. They might be afraid for their family statuses. So when in recommending college or universities, just being conscious that this might be students who are the first ones to come to college. And even if they do have that permanent residency within the United States, they're the first ones to go to college. Their parents maybe did not attend to college in their home country, or even if they did, the whole process in general, it's completely different than in their home country. So mostly it's just taking the time to explain, getting to know your student, getting to know the situation they're at, and then from there, doing those that active, proactive conversations, and to better advise them and being able to connect them to the resources that they might need. And also, we might not know the response to a lot of a student's questions. We might not know what it means a student to be asylum seeking student and when they might become a permanent resident. What will that mean for a student who wants to complete a FAFSA application? Will they be eligible for financial aid? It's okay not to know, because even myself, I don't know the different spectrum of immigration statuses and what every single policy that comes out every month or every year might mean. But then our job is to make sure that if we don't know the answer to a question or to a particular situation with our students, is to make sure that we're connecting with community partners that might be able to help this student even when we don't have those resources ourselves, to better guide them.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for sharing. You both have such a wealth of experience and expertise. And because of that, we're doing a breakout room and a Q&A, because we both had our presenters, they each have their own areas of expertise. We wanted to allow our participants time to ask any questions they may have based on their own student populations or their own needs, and get specific if they need to. So in a moment, you'll be prompted to join a breakout room for additional discussion and Q&A. You're going to get to join the breakout room of your choice. So Dr. Catherine Walker-Payne will be in one breakout room, and Amalia will be in the other breakout room, and you'll be able to choose which one. And you'll have about 10 minutes to ask additional questions and have some additional discussions kind of along our topics that we've had today. And that should, the prompt box should pop up for you in a second to choose which one.
Before you do that, there is a question in the chat. If Amalia or Dr. Walker-Payne wants to address, Any thoughts on working with students who feel their language accommodations are being removed too soon? And she elaborated by saying like more time for testing, but the official argument is that they've graduated from those ELL programs. So people are encouraging them not to depend on language supports indefinitely. I don't know if you all want to answer that now or if you want to answer it in the breakout room, but just wanted to make sure that that question did not get missed.
I think we can, either way, I would be more than happy to answer that question in the breakout room.
Are you ready for us to hop to breakout rooms?
Yes.
Do you guys want to go to a room? I can move you.
If you click on breakout rooms, if you're not sure where to go to, if you click on breakout rooms and you scroll down, you'll see the list of people. You'll have two options where you can join a room. That's where you find that.
Sorry, I was waiting for like a pop-up prompt box. I see it now.
Where they get to go to college, but they're really learning more life skills than getting a degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a good institutional fit example because, you know, because depending on a student's needs, a traditional bachelor's program may not be the best fit. But yeah, some of those, oh gosh, I think it's SHEP around the state, which we don't offer, is a really great opportunity for some students to have a college-like experience and skill up a little bit without the structure of a 4-year degree program. Yeah. What other ways do you all work with students with disabilities?
I think, and you kind of mentioned it when you were initially talking, but specifically in the role that I work with students, don't work for an institution, but work with students at different institutions. So we don't have access to those records of if they have a disability or if they don't. And to your point, so many times those students in general don't want to disclose that or ask for that help. And many times, once they do finally reach out to us, most of the time their response is, "Oh, I wish I would have reached out to you sooner," which I'm like, yeah, me too. but it's that getting them to that point. So having those organic conversations to kind of peel back those layers to see those things. But also, do you have any I guess suggestions on maybe targeted questions or targeted conversations that one can have to kind of organically reveal those things without being overly invasive, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I mentioned earlier, I think asking students what's worked well for them in school is often a really good way if they're able to open up about, I really my gosh, when my teacher had us read aloud in class, that was the worst thing in the world. I would have liked to have sunk into the floor. Oftentimes that could be a flag for, for several different things, but it's a good opportunity to kind of understand those students for whom reading might be a particularly uncomfortable thing. I think just asking students, like, how do you feel like your learning has been up to this point can be really helpful. And, and I mean, granted, I'm talking a lot about students with, with learning differences, kind of in some of this type of stuff. But I think really trying to understand what students are worried about with going to college. There's so many different worries that come out in so many different ways. But if they're worried that they're going to get left behind right away, maybe not. But it's still, I think it's back to that institutional fit question, at least for some students, to kind of understand that they're not sure if they have the skills to reach out and speak up, would be a couple of those leading questions. Students sometimes are really quick in their admissions letters to talk about disability, and sometimes they don't want to disclose that. And there are pros and cons to both of those approaches. But if they can talk a little bit about their learning differences, especially for a school like us, when we review those applications, sometimes we'll see those flags for a student, especially if they talk about, having had an IEP in high school in their admissions letter. And, we'll send them information about my office right away. Whereas some students, and rightfully so, don't want to disclose that they have accommodation needs in their letter for fear that they'll be rejected from the university. But yeah, I mean, I think asking students the ways that they've been supported and what's worked for them in the past is a good way to at least start that conversation. But it is tricky. I mean, I see it with students I teach as well. I'll have students in my class sometimes, and I would think that accommodations would be of benefit to that student, but they don't always disclose, and they don't have to. It's hard.
Thank you.
So has there been a common experience that you've dealt with in your role that seems to come up a lot, like maybe it could have been avoided if students had had this conversation with their high school counselors before they get to you?
I'm surprised how many students I see on the first day of school who walk in with a copy of their IEP and they go, here's my IEP, I'm ready for my accommodations. And I mean, they really literally, and nobody's told them otherwise, but they really literally believe that their high school IEP is going to just, like, that will be the thing that they give their professors. Or I'll get a call from a faculty member where the student has shared their IEP. I mean, that's one of those primary things where helping students know that, I mean, yes, I can use your IEP as supporting documentation, but your IEP does not apply in a college setting is probably that one thing that students are often surprised about. The other thing is, I'll have students who show up and maybe they've had sort of a classroom aide support them in high school. And they're like, okay, well, where's my person? We don't have that person here. It's a very different experience.
Dr. Walker-Payne, kind of spinning off of what Christy asked. So what can secondary school staff do to kind of help? I know you've talked about a lot of different things, but do you all go into secondary schools? I know you all mentioned the key to partnerships, but do you all ever go into schools and do presentations to underrepresented groups and specifically address these needs with those staff members and students? Or, how does that work? What can we do to bridge that gap?
Yeah, I think inviting, even if it's not your specific, even if your students at your high school that you're working with aren't specifically interested in a university that's close by, usually our offices, I mean, we work to support student success. It's not recruitment. I know we're about to run out of time, but I think that having folks come in. So yeah, I work with JCPS and the Archdiocese here in Louisville to do some of those sessions for students and families who are going to high school. So absolutely, personally, I'm happy to do that. If you're far enough from Louisville that it's not a reasonable trip, I'm happy to do a Zoom. But I think having students think about what those disability resource centers and the colleges that they're considering look like and getting in touch is so important. I mean, I think, so JCPS does a fair with disability resource centers around the state that's virtual. And I wonder if doing a statewide session like that might be something that could be really, really valuable to bring in the disability services centers around the state.
Thank you. That's a great idea.
Right. I think we're all coming back, but I know we were in like some pretty awesome conversations. So we do have a couple minutes to, if we want to share. I don't know if there's any final questions or just thoughts that you're having right now based on some of the discussion that was just had. And also, if you continue to have questions, please pop those in the chat right now. And we'll be sure to connect you with our guest presenters after today's session. All right, hold on. Well, thank you all again for participating in that and being with us today. I know that was a lot of like great conversation happening. Since we're coming to the end of our time together, I do want to encourage you to stay connected, of course, with the Kentucky Advising Academy, and be sure to register and be on the lookout for our March webinar. Our registration is available now, and you'll notice a different date than our usual second Thursday of every month, with this next webinar occurring on March 14th. And we did that to avoid a lot of districts had ACT testing windows that second week of March. We wanted to make sure we were accommodating for that. So we hope you'll join us then. March's topic is ILP updates and the importance of early career awareness. And we also know that some of you might have joined us in the fall for our fall professional learning series, and we thank you for your attendance, but we wanted to share that registration is now open for our spring professional learning. That's scheduled at the end of February and right at the beginning of March at KCTCS campuses across the state. And our spring professional learning this time is focused on elevating post-secondary partnerships. And we'll build on fall's learning, but you did not have to attend the fall to be able to understand or participate or get some really valuable information from the spring. So we really hope that everyone will join us. These meetings are tailored to school counselors, administrators, Frisky coordinators, post-secondary advisors, community partners, and like we mentioned earlier, just the entire realm of what it means to be a post-secondary advisors are always welcome to attend. And we encourage you guys to also bring colleagues who are a part of your advising process to work on considering innovative ways that we can support all students. And 6 hours of ELA and Frisky credit is available for that training. So again, if you want to use the QR code, we also have our website here, and we're going to provide all these links to you in a little bit. So if you miss it while it's up on the screen, don't worry, we have these links coming at you in the chat as well. And it can always, of course, all be found on our website. Speaking of website, you can follow us there. All of our updates are always posted to our website. All of our offerings, our webinars, our podcast, and as well as how to register for our events. You can also follow us on social media. Our accounts are at Kentucky Advising Academy, and we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And if you search for the Kentucky Advising Academy on YouTube, you can also find all of our past webinars, as well as this one will be posted a little later this week. And we also record the breakout rooms. So if you chose one breakout room and you want to see what the other one was discussing, both of those will also be in that YouTube video. Again, we thank you all for being here with us today. That's all that we have. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to pop that in the chat. We have all of our important links that are being supplied in the chat as well. This QR code and form is if you need to access or submit for that ELA credit, as well as just some evaluative questions on our discussion and topic for today. We hope to see you at all of our future events. And thank you so much again to Dr. Walker Payne, as well as Amalia Gomez for their thoughtful insight and expertise shared with us today. Thank
And
you,
they
guys.
also dropped their emails in the chat box should you need to email them as well.
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Thank you, ladies, for joining us. Thank you all for joining us as participants. And remember, if you do need ELA or Frisky credit, that you need to complete that survey so that we can get that to you. And we so appreciate your all's attendance today and hope you gained a lot of valuable information.